Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently sparked debate after warning that modern progressivism can threaten constitutional principles.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was speaking, and he started talking about or sharing his thoughts on progressivism, saying that progressivism is actually a threat to our union, that it's becoming a bit much, that he's a little bit concerned about it, that it is antithetical to our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. And in the comments, there were so many people repeating the same thing, and that is, if it were not for progressivism, he wouldn't be here. So essentially what they're saying and how they're interpreting this is, well, progressivism is about change and progress. And so why is he against it when he's a black man, and without it, he would not be allowed to be a Supreme Court justice? Then it dawned on me, a lot of people do not understand the difference between progressivism and conservatism as it relates to the Constitution. When you are talking about the Constitution, there are two different things at play, and it's important to know the difference. His concern is that the Constitution is being interpreted too loosely and that the government is gaining too much power over time. This is a legitimate concern. For all the people, all my life, I've been hearing people say, we don't trust the government, we don't want the government in our business, we don't want them encroaching on our lives, etc., etc. Okay, so yes, there has to be a mechanism to restrain politicians from obtaining too much power. The concern is that politicians are finding ways to backdoor the Constitution and change the laws to fit their agenda and not keep or conserve the Constitution for in its original intent. Progressivism is the idea that society should evolve, that government should provide economic relief and social services, or that laws and the Constitution should be interpreted in a more modern context. Conservatism in the constitutional sense is the belief that the Constitution should be interpreted in its original intent, that you should scale back, be more cautious with government expansion, that you should not allow government to obtain so much power, that government power should essentially be limited. The mix-up is that people believe progressivism means change and that conservatism means no change or resistance. Their interpretation is, oh, you think of civil rights, well, that's progress, so yes, I'm progressive. That's how that is interpreted. No, we're talking about the law and the Constitution. So he's talking about his concerns with government overreach. Progressivism is about adaptation or reform or expanding government's role. Conservatism is preservation or limits, essentially constitutional restraint. One is, yes, let's have more government, and the other one is, no, wait a minute, maybe that's not a good idea. We need to reassess this. You need a balance, but when you're being too progressive, okay, now we have an issue. Just the same if you're too conservative and you don't have balance, that's equally an issue. These two are about speed of change, the role of government, and how the Constitution is interpreted.
Thomas argued that the Constitution should be interpreted according to its original meaning and expressed concern about government power expanding over time.
If Clarence Thomas has zero haters, that means I've been run over and killed by a PT Cruiser. Because Clarence Thomas should have never been a Supreme Court justice. Had we listened to this black woman, he would have been in the back of a police car and not on the bench of the Supreme Court. In 1991, Thurgood Marshall retires from the Supreme Court. Big Bush says, hey, we need a black and a Republican to replace him. Who does he pick? Clarence Thomas. The Senate Judiciary Committee sent a subpoena to a black woman in Oklahoma named Anita Hill. But why? Well, in 1981, Clarence Thomas is working for the Department of Education. In 1982, Ronald Reagan gives him a job to chair the EEOC. In all three of these years, he had a black woman named Anita Hill working up under him. And in all three of these years, he sexually harassed this woman. Anita says that for 3 years, Clarence begged her to go on a date with him, would bring up his manhood in the workplace, would talk about his pubes and things of that nature, would talk about explicit films, all in the workplace during the 9 to 5. Anita came in to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee to tell her story. The only problem is the people she was testifying before were 14 white men, and they weren't trying to hear anything she had to say. Frankly, a lot of their line of questioning was disrespectful.
His comments quickly drew criticism online. Many people argued that without the social and political progress achieved through the civil rights movement, Thomas himself would never have had the opportunity to serve on the Supreme Court.
A black man that's so anti-black you just feel like it's a setup. That's Clarence Thomas, the longest-serving judge on the Supreme Court, and the one most committed to rolling back the very rights that allowed him to rise. And his wife, that's the kind of white woman that's every black woman's worst nightmare. But we'll get to her. So let's start at the beginning. Clarence Thomas was born in 1948 in Pinpoint, Georgia. Dirt poor and Jim Crow raised. He grew up speaking Gullah, was raised Catholic, went to seminary, and almost became a priest. But racism followed him everywhere until he flipped. And I don't mean flipped the system, I mean flipped on us. By the time he reached Yale Law School, he started to resent affirmative action. Not the racism that made it necessary, but the fact that white folks assumed he didn't belong. Instead of challenging them, he decided to join them. And in the 1980s, he got cozy with the conservatives. Reagan appointed him to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But instead of protecting black workers, this man gutted the very civil rights regulations that he was hired to enforce. Then George H.W. Bush made, sorry, you can't make this shit up. Then George H.W. Bush made him a Supreme Court justice in 1991. They call it replacing Thurgood Marshall, but he's no replacement. He took the seat. And that's when Anita Hill happened. A brilliant black woman came forward, under oath, and told the Senate Judiciary Committee that Clarence Thomas sexually harassed her at work. He turned around and called it high-tech lynching, thereby weaponizing black pain to cover his own misconduct. And America let him do it. He got confirmed. And ever since, he's been on a mission to dismantle every bit of progress that we've ever made. So, what has he done since he's been sitting on the bench? He voted to gut the Voting Rights Act. He voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. He wants to challenge birth control, gay marriage, and privacy rights. He openly signaled that he'd reverse Brown v. Board if he could twist the logic. And through it all, he barely talks. He lets his rulings do the damage. So let's talk corruption. This man has accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in luxury trips, yacht rides, and tuition payments for his grandnephew. All from conservative billionaire Harlan Crow. He never disclosed them. He said he didn't think he...
Others defended him, saying his remarks were not about opposing progress, but about limiting government power and preserving constitutional restraint. The discussion soon shifted to Thomas's controversial past. Critics pointed to his 1991 Supreme Court confirmation hearings, during which law professor Anita Hill accused him of sexual harassment.
Anita tells her story in excruciating detail. Clarence responds and calls this nothing but a high-tech lynching. And that was it. Clarence Thomas still becomes a Supreme Court justice. Anita Hill goes back to her life as a professor at Oklahoma State. She receives death threats, and nobody believes her. Clarence Thomas wouldn't speak about this, wouldn't even really deny the allegations until he spoke about it in his 2007 book, My Grandfather's Son, where he called Anita Hill his most traitorous adversary and said that she was mentally ill. Anita Hill is still alive, still a lawyer, still a professor of law, and I hope wherever she is, that she had a great day today.
Hill testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee and detailed allegations from the years she worked under Thomas. Despite the controversy, Thomas was confirmed and joined the nation's highest court. For many critics, that episode remains an important part of his legacy. They argue that Thomas has spent much of his time on the Supreme Court supporting decisions that weaken protections created through decades of civil rights activism.
Listen up, family. Let me say this with my whole chest. Clarence Thomas is one of the biggest disappointments in modern American history. And no, I'm not saying that because he's black or I think that he should think a certain way. I'm saying it because he knows. He knows what this country was. He knows what segregation felt like. He knows what poverty looked like. He knows what it's meant to be born in the Jim Crow South in Pinpoint, Georgia, where opportunities was not handed to black children on a silver platter. He knows what it's meant for people before him to march, to bleed, get beaten, lose jobs, lose homes, and lose their lives so that somebody like him can even sit on the highest court of the land. And that is what makes this so painful. Because Clarence Thomas did not climb through an open door. Oh no. That door was kicked open by the civil rights movement. That door was held open by black mothers, black fathers, black students, black veterans, black organizers, and black church people who said, we are not asking America for permission to be human. And what did Clarence Thomas do when he got inside? He closed the door. No, let me correct that. He closed the door, locked it, bolted it, put a chair against it, and then acted like no one else was ever standing outside. That is not strength. That is not independence. That is not, I made it on my own. That is historical amnesia dressed up in a black robe. How do you benefit from the sacrifice of a movement, then turn around and help weaken the very protection that was fought for you? How do you sit in a seat made possible by civil rights struggle and then support decisions that make it harder to protect voting rights, harder to defend racial equality, harder for the institution to even acknowledge the weight of the country's history? And please don't tell me, well, he just following the Constitution. Because the Constitution had to be forced to recognize us. The Constitution had to be amended. The courts had to challenge. The streets had to be filled. The bridges had to be crossed. The dogs and the horses had to be faced. The ballot had to be protected because America did not wake up one morning and decide to be fair. People fought for that fairness. People died for that fairness. And Justice Thomas knows that. That's why this is so disappointing. That's why it cuts so deep. Because this is not just about politics. It's about memory. It's about responsibility. This is about what you owe the people whose back became the bridge for you to walk over. You don't have to agree with every policy. You don't have to support every program. You don't have to be a carbon copy for anybody's politics. But when you are a black man in America who rose from poverty and segregation to the Supreme Court, you should understand better than most that colorblind language does not erase color-conscious damage. You cannot pretend racism is over just because you personally survived it. You cannot take your individual success story and use it as a weapon against everybody still trying to climb. Because that is what hurts. It feels like he looked back at the community and shrugged his shoulders. Saw the struggle still happening and said, well, I made it. Good luck. No, sir. That is not legacy. That's abandonment. The civil rights movement was not just about one black man getting a powerful title. It was about making sure the next child, the next family, the next voter, the next student, the next generation had a fair shot too. So yes, I'm disappointed in Clarence Thomas. Disappointed as a black man, a black American, disappointed as an American, disappointed as someone who understands that power without compassion is dangerous. Disappointed because he had the chance to be a guardian of justice, and too often he has chosen to be a gatekeeper against the very people history who should have taught him to protect. And Justice Thomas needs to understand something clearly. When you help dismantle protections built from black pain, People are going to remember. When you weaken rights paid for in blood, people are going to speak. When you climb up because of others' sacrifice, then turn around and lock the door behind you, people are going to call it what it is, a betrayal. Not just to a community, a betrayal of the struggle that made his rise possible. Now that's my opinion, and ponder that.
His positions on issues such as voting rights and affirmative action have made him a particularly controversial figure among many civil rights advocates. Others argue that Thomas's own life story makes these debates even more significant. Born into poverty and raised during segregation in the South, he rose to become one of the most powerful judges in America.
Committee, what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged?
You testified this morning that the most embarrassing question involved, it's not too bad, women's large breasts. That's a word. Are you interested in writing a book?
It is appropriate to ask Professor Hill anything any member wishes to ask her to plumb the depths of her credibility.
You are not now drawing a conclusion that Judge Thomas sexually harassed you.
Yes, I am drawing that conclusion. That's
Well, I
fine.
understand.
Critics say that Journey was made possible by generations of activists who fought for equal rights, while supporters believe his success reflects personal determination and constitutional principles. As a result, Clarence Thomas remains one of the most divisive figures in American politics and law. Supporters view him as a judge committed to the Constitution's original meaning, while critics see him as someone whose decisions have rolled back important civil rights protections. More than 3 decades after joining the Supreme Court, the debate over his legacy continues.